There, I didn't forget that. Back again, sorry, I'm going to repeat a little bit because I want this on the recording. Todd Stanley is the author of many teacher education books, including Teacher's Toolbox for Gifted Education, Promoting Rigor Through Higher Level Questioning, When Smart Kids Underachieve in School, and How the Hell Do We Motivate These Kids? He served as a classroom teacher for 18 years, teaching everything from third graders to seniors in high school. And he's currently the Gifted Services Coordinator for Pickerington Local Schools in Central Ohio, where he lives with his wife and 2 daughters. He's also an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati. You can follow him on Twitter, and he'll provide that at the Gifted Guy address for you during his presentation, or visit his website at thegiftedguy.com, where you can access blogs, resources, and view presentations he has given. And thank you for joining us for How Do We Motivate Gifted Children?
Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate that. So isn't that the $1 million question? How do we motivate kids? And I wish I had the $1 million answer so that I was a millionaire, but I have strategies. And I have some things to consider when it comes to motivation, because the really challenging thing about motivating students in general is that different things motivate different people. So we can't just do one thing and then hope that motivates everyone. We have to, just like education, needs to be personalized and individualized. So I'm going to try to provide some strategies that you might think about in order to motivate gifted students. But I also want to lay down a little bit of the why. I think it's really important to understand the why we have this motivation problem in the first place. So as Mark said, my name's Todd Stanley, and my Twitter handle is there at the bottom at _gifted_guy. And one of the books that I wrote was How the Hell Do We Motivate These Kids, which was kind of how to motivate any kids, not just gifted kids, but kids in general, through engagement and through authentic learning. So I also go by The Gifted Guy. And I have a website at thegiftedguy.com. Feel free to check that out. It's all free. I have videos on there. I have educational blogs. I have teacher resources. I have professional development modules, all sorts of things. It's all free. It's just a repository for the work that I do with professional development in my own district and also in other places as well. So let me give you some background. So some statistics on underachievement amongst gifted students. The speculation is that 10 to 50% of gifted students suffer from underachievement. And I know that number is a bit wide. And the reason it's tough to put an exact number on it, because some students are underachievers in some areas and some are not in others. And then there's also those students who get straight A's, but are still underachievers. I mean, those students that are in your class, they get all A's on everything they do, but they don't put much effort and they don't really work that hard, and they don't seem to be getting, growing any as a result. And so those students are still underachievers, even though their grades don't indicate otherwise. It tends to be predominantly more with boys than girls, especially when it comes to Black and Latinx boys, where underachievement is really high traditionally. And so keep in mind that, there are girls that are underachievers as well. And this was a shocking statistic to me that I came across when I was writing one of my books. And it was that 18 to 25% of students who drop out of high school have been identified as gifted. Now, I want to put that in perspective real quick. A kid that is gifted, that doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically smart or automatically brilliant or automatically a great student, but they are capable. That's one thing it does definitely show. And so if you're capable, you can pass just about any class. But these students are so disengaged from school, and it could be things outside factors such as a cruddy home life, or it could be, a drug problem or something like that. But a lot of it is just that they just become disengaged. And because they become disengaged, they don't want anything to do with school. And so that they drop out. So in Baltimore, they did a long-term study with gifted students. And so they identified 2 groups of students. One group identified themselves as high achievers, and the other one identified themselves as underachievers. And when they polled these kids, they found out that 100% of the high achievers went on to a 4-year college. Not that a four-year college is the end all be all litmus test of success, but it does show that you have a willingness to continue to learn and to grow as a person. Only 87% of the underachievers went to a four-year college. That's not bad. It's not bad. So 13% did not, but 87% is not bad. However, out of the students who are high achievers, 83% of them actually graduated from that four-year college, and less than half of the underachievers did. And the reason why I bring up these statistics is because underachievement is certainly something that kids start to develop. They learn. It's a learned habit. It's not something that they're born with. They learn it. And unfortunately, they also learn habits, and they learn bad habits. And so if you're an underachiever in middle school and high school and whatever, and you go on to college, it's going to continue on to follow you. And those habits are going to prevent you from being as successful as you want to be. They even followed these students when they got into their adult lives, and there was long-term effects. They found that 13 years after they graduated from high school, that the underachievers had less stability in their careers, less stable marriages than the high achievers did. So even in life, this underachievement is affecting them. And these people still display the characteristics such as low self-esteem, lack of persistence, the inability to accept responsibility, and they don't have grit. And it doesn't mean that all of them are like that, but what you see a clear pattern of is that if you're an underachiever in school and you don't turn that around, then it can follow you for the rest of your life. So why are kids unmotivated? And so for gifted kids especially, it becomes this dilemma in schools, which is a gifted student on average has to hear something 6 times before they master, before they get it. So that light bulb goes off and they have it. A regular ed kid on average has to hear something 12 times. And a special ed kid has to hear it 18 or more. Now, there are exceptions to those rules, but those are the average. So imagine you're a gifted ed student and you've got it after 6 times. And you have to hear it 12 more times because you're in a mixed ability classroom. And how mind-numbing would that be? How quickly would you get bored? How disengaged would you become hearing the same thing over and over and over and not learning anything new? And so a lot of times it looks, the gifted student kind of it looks like this. And so this is a scene from the movie The Incredibles 2. And Dash, who is really talented and has high ability as a runner, he's very fast, has to slow down so that the other kids don't feel bad about themselves, or because he doesn't want to show off, or because he doesn't, he doesn't want to make anyone feel as though they're inadequate. And this is what happens sometimes in the classroom, is that gifted students are forced to slow down because the pace of the classroom is set kind of at that middle kid. And if your pace isn't quick enough, you have to catch up. And if your pace is beyond that, you have to slow down and you have to wait for others to catch up. And that can be really frustrating. So then the Gallup poll did a study of engagement when it comes to school. You can see very clearly here. I mean, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. The longer kids are in school, the less engaged they become. So in elementary, 3 out of every 4 kids are engaged. By the time to get to high school, it's less than half. And the question becomes, what causes students to not be engaged? Not just gifted students, but students in general. And so there are lots of theories and lots of things that I've observed in my own career. And we'll talk about some of these as we go along. One problem I see in schools in general is that the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which is that intrinsic motivation is enjoyment from within. You do something for the sake of doing it. You do something because you either get enjoyment out of it, or you get, it's a passion of yours. It's fun. You're doing it for, and most of our hobbies, we are intrinsically motivated. We're not doing it to accomplish, to get any rewards. We're doing it because it's something we're passionate about. So I play tennis, and I play tennis 2-3 times a week. And I'm not doing it because I'm expecting to go out there and win trophies or to go to Wimbledon or anything like that. But I love tennis and it's a lot of fun and I'm passionate about it. So I'm intrinsically motivated to do that. Not so much when it comes to taking the trash out. So, and so when it comes to extrinsic motivators, extrinsic motivators involve rewards. So in the adult world, it's your promotions. It might be pay raise. It might be any benefits. It could be winning something. It could be, getting some perks. And unfortunately, extrinsic motivation is not as long-term when it comes to motivating. And what Alfie Cohen in his brilliant book, Punished by Rewards, found out is that when you take these prizes away, students stop working. And so they're only motivated by the prize as long as it's there. And when it's no longer there, they're no longer motivated. So if you want long-term motivation, if you want kids to really be engaged in what they're doing, we have to reach their intrinsic motivators. We have to appeal to their love of learning, their curiosity. Unfortunately, the way that schools are set up a lot of times is like this. These are a lot of the extrinsic motivators that we use in school, and I'm not going to read them all to you, but it's grades, it's rewards for doing things, it's it's praise, it's extra recess and incentives. The PREMAC principle, which you see there, is the principle of if you do this awful thing, we'll do something fun. So if you eat your broccoli, you'll get a dessert. And in school, we'll be like, oh, if you do these fractions, we'll go outside for recess or whatever. So it's getting students to do something by something they don't want to do by giving them something that they do. And we have a lot of extrinsic motivators in school, grades being the worst culprit, where we're holding these grades over these kids like carrots. And the problem with when you have these carrots is that it extinguishes this intrinsic motivation. And so students are only doing it for the grade. And it also causes creativity to shut down. And it also fosters real short-term thinking. So students are learning it long enough to take the test, to get the grade, and then they're forgetting it. They're not learning it for the sake of learning it. And this can be a real issue. And so what happens, as you can see in this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, is that students start to play the game. And so I had a friend of my daughter's. He finished first in his class, in a class of 500 students. So fairly big class. He finished first. He was taking 6 AP courses his senior year. And after he graduated, I said to him, I'm like, why did you take all those AP classes? Did you get enjoyment out of them? Did you do it? And he goes, no, I was playing the game. He goes, I would take easier classes that gave me the GPA that I needed in order to make me first in the class. And he was a very bright student and he's a very curious student, but he was not doing school for the right reasons. He was doing school for the sake of getting this number one in the class. And so that intrinsic motivator was not there. It was the extrinsic one that was there. So one thing we need to consider is that intrinsic needs or motivations also meet the needs of people. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is your basic needs. Your basic needs are food, shelter, warmth, love, whatever. Okay. Then there's psychological needs, like this feeling of accomplishment. And at the top of the pyramid is the self-fulfillment. And if you have a kid that's intrinsically motivated, they're doing it because they love to do it or because of a sense of accomplishment. This meets this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so you're appealing to the inner needs of people. And so that's why intrinsic is much better. And so I'll talk about some ways that you can intrinsically motivate students. But first, I want to talk about the concept of goal valuation. Goal valuation is how interesting something is, how important something is, and how attainable something is. Not in general, but to a specific person. So how interesting does a person find it? How important do they determine that it is? How attainable does it seem to be for them? And so what happens is we have students like student type number one, where you need one of these in order to convince them to be motivated. So if you can convince a student that what they're doing is important, then they're going to be willing to put forth the effort. They don't need it to be interesting or attainable. They just need to know it's important. There are other students that need a lot of students that need to have it be interesting. I see that more and more with this generation that are in the schools now, is it has to be interesting because they have their engagement met all the time through TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and other things that they can pull up at a moment's notice. then some kids have to be able to see the finish line. They have to be able to see how to attain what it is that they're doing. If they can't see that finish line, they're like, why should I even try? I mean, it would be like telling someone to say, okay, I want you to go out and run a marathon tomorrow. If people haven't been training, they'd be like, or they can't comprehend that. They'd be like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So we need to show the finish line to students. We need to help them see how it can be attained. Student type number 2 is the student that needs to have 2 of these factors. So the student might need it to be interesting and important. And so these are tougher to motivate because you have to do both of these, or they might need it to see how they attain it and how important it is. And so these are tougher students to motivate because they need 2 of these factors. And then, of course, the toughest nut of all to crack is the student type number 3, who needs all 3 of them. You have to convince them it's important. You have to show them it's interesting, and you have to make them aware of the finish line and how they can attain what it is you're asking them to do. And so because it takes all 3 of those, motivating that student becomes very difficult. But it can be done if you set up your classroom in a way where you show kids why things are important, you make the lessons interesting, and you make it clear through visible learning what it is that they're going to be doing and how they're going to attain that. But sometimes that doesn't happen in the classroom. And so students don't become motivated. So when it comes to gifted students specifically, in my opinion, in the 26 years I've been in education, the best way to motivate a gifted student is to engage their mind, because their mind is naturally curious. All kids are naturally curious, but gifted kids especially are really curious. So if you can engage their mind, if you can help them see like why this would be interesting to do or why this would be important or whatever, they are going to be more willing to be on board with what it is that you're asking them to do. And so I have found that I have students that would they'd have a reputation. They'd be like, this student is, I had a seventh grader who was coming up, and they warned me, Jacob, he drops F-bombs all the time. He won't do work. He's belligerent. He's all these things. And he got in my classroom, and I had a very engaging classroom. We did hands-on learning. We did a lot of project-based learning. And Jacob came in my class, and I had not a single problem with Jacob because Jacob was engaged. And so a lot of times what happens with gifted kids is when they become disengaged, then they act out, or we think that they're being rude when they're really just curious, and they're curious about something, and they're asking about that. And so I have found with gifted students, especially, if we can engage their minds, we're going to be better off motivating them. And so the question becomes, how do we do this? And so I'm going to give you 5 different strategies to consider when it comes to getting students motivated, and especially the gifted students, and engaging them. The first one I'm going to talk about is interests. And this is really simple. And this ties right into that interesting goal evaluation, which is, what is the student interested in? And it doesn't have to necessarily be tied to a content standard or whatever. It can be, there are other things. In other words, sometimes as a social studies teacher, I have to teach things that just aren't interesting. Learning about the Indus River Valley civilization, or learning about, the Articles of Confederation aren't the most exciting things in the world to learn. But if I can tap into other interests, like if a student really likes technology, and I have them use technology to show me what they learned. Or I have students that, like to, do YouTube videos, and they want to shoot a video reenactment. I mean, we can tap into all sorts of interest from our students. And this definitely checks off the box of, how interesting they find it. Because if you tap into their interests, then you have them. And here's the thing that I always find really interesting is that all kids, but especially all gifted kids, love to learn. They just don't necessarily love to learn what you're teaching them. So this is that student that doesn't do their work in school, gets really poor grades, and goes home and practices the guitar for 5 hours because it's something they're interested in. Or the kid that plays, I have a nephew that plays video games all night long, every single night. He's very motivated by that. He's not motivated by a lot of else. And so if you can tap into that interest he has in video games using gamification in the classroom, then you're going to be better off getting this kid interested. So how do we find out what kids are interested in? Well, the simple yet difficult way is that we ask them, we talk to them, we have conversations with them. So you can use different things for this. Carol Ann Tomlinson talks about how interest is it taps into the curiosity, their passion, and it doesn't have to be content. It could be a particular skill as well. So can we tap in the interest that they have, a skill? I had a student, he wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg. And so he would, every time we had something, he'd say, Mr. Stanley, can I make a movie of it? And I'm like, sure. And he didn't really care about the content, although he did a really good job with it. But each time he made one of his movies, he tried a different technique. So in this one, he might be using flashbacks. In this one, he might be using black and white. In this one, he might be using special effects. For each one, he was doing something he was interested in and then showing me what I was interested in him learning. So it could be a skill. And so again, we can ask students directly. So here's a simple elementary school student interest survey where we ask them, their favorite sport, their books, their whatever. I would like to get better at, I'd like to learn more about. And so we're starting to get what students really like. And you can do this the very first day of school where you can have conversations. That's the way I like to do it best, is just having conversations with students. Of course, you have to set up your classroom in such a way that you have time to do that. And you can't do that if you're in front of the classroom talking all the time. And so I tried to get away from being in front of the classroom and did a lot of project-based learning where kids would be working independently and I could go around and have conversations with them. It could be a specific subject area and the interest that they show in that. So this is a math interest inventory where what are 3 things they enjoy about math? What are some things they dislike about math? So from this overall profile, you're going to get an idea of what this student is going to be willing to do when it comes to math. And so they may have a mindset, a very fixed mindset where they don't think they can learn math. There's those people that just say, I can't do math. And then, or do we know that this student is someone who is open-minded about it and is willing to give it a try? And it even has the rate the following math materials from 1 being the favorite to 4 being, it has flashcards, manipulatives, worksheets, and technology. And so, of course, I doubt any kid is doing the worksheet one. But the teacher then knows, okay, because you may have, with this class, a lot of kids did check the worksheet. So I would do worksheets with them. But this class really likes technology. So we'll use a little more technology. And then lastly, here's a more for older kids, student interest inventory. And I like this one because not only does it ask them about their personal likes and their subject area likes, but also their social emotional. So it talks about here that the accomplishment you're most proud of, or the television show you hate to miss, or you get really angry when this happens, or what's a future career that you have. So you're tapping into those Maslow's hierarchy, those needs that students have, and you're getting an understanding of those things. There's also what's called, you probably are familiar with what's called a KWL chart, which is what you know, what you want to know, and what you learned. I like the KWH chart a lot better. And so I'll do this with students as a pre-assessment where I'll try to figure out what they already know. And then I ask them what they want to know. What are they curious about? Is something that they would really be interested in? And so then I can tap into that. And then how you will learn is the process. What process do they like to? So if you have a kid that every time he says, I'll learn about it by watching YouTube video, they're a visual learner. And that's the way that you're best going to make them interested in what they're doing or motivated. The second strategy I'm going to talk about is student choice. And this kind of ties into interest. So once you've determined what their interests are, do you give them choice to do these things? Students aren't given a lot of choice, especially when they're young. I mean, young students, their parents are telling them what to do. Their friends are telling them what to do. Their coaches, their big brothers and sisters, whomever, kids don't get a whole lot of choice. So when you give them choice, they become more intrinsically motivated because they're having a say-so in their own education. So we can do choice when it comes to content. So what it is that they're going to be learning. We can do it in the process, which is how they're going to be learning it. And then there's the product, which is what are they going to do to demonstrate what they learn. And so content is the first one. And so I'm going to use this bike as an example. Content is like, what are the facts? So in this case, what are the parts of the bike? So the seat, the handlebars, the wheels, whatever. This is the what they are learning. And so a lot of times content comes down to facts, things of that nature. When you look at content standards, you're looking at a lot of facts that kids need to know. However, and so when it comes to this content, what we want to do is if we give kids a choice and to decide what they're going to learn and to discovery learning, then they're going to be more motivated. And so here's an example. So if I were teaching a unit on self-identity, does every kid have to read the same book? I'm so tired of classrooms where kids always read the same book. I mean, what if I gave kids a choice? If you want to read Wonder, or if you want to read Catcher in the Rye, or if you want to read Little Women, and each of these are at different levels on the when it comes to reading levels. And so, but we train kids to hate reading because we make everyone read the same book, and then just kill their interest and curiosity in it. So if we give them choice in that, then that's going to make a big difference. They're going to be much more motivated to read that book. It could be what it is that you're teaching. When I taught the American Revolution, I knew that my kid, if I taught the entire American Revolution, my kids would learn 5 minutes for every single topic, and they would remember none of it. But I could give them a survey lecture and have them pick things they're interested in, and then they could become experts. So a kid might study the Boston Massacre. A group might look at King George and his role. Another group may look at the taxes, like such as the Quartering Act, which were used during the American Revolution, and they become experts on that. And when they leave there, they don't know everything about the American Revolution, although the way I set it up is that they would also teach the class what they had learned, and so they would learn from each other. But they knew how to learn, and they knew how to become an expert in something. Process is then how do you do what you're doing? So with a bike, we don't need to know the parts. We need to know how it works. How do we get it to work? How do we get the wheels turning? How do we turn the pedals to do that? And that's the process of learning. And so assignments should be based on not on the number of problems. I always do these 20 problems or write 3 pages of this or whatever. It has to do with the impact that the assignment has on the learning and the learning process in general. So if a kid can get it after 5 problems, why do they have to do the other 15? If a kid can say what they need to say and it doesn't take a whole entire page, that's okay. So I never like putting a number to things. And so there are lots of choices you can make in the process. And so I'll just give you one example that I used in my classroom. When I was teaching 5th and 6th grade science, the way I set up my classroom was I put these content standards, which you see right here up on these bulletin board, and I had 6 different units. I had space, I had chemical versus physical changes, all these different units. Kids would go and they would choose which unit they wanted to start. They would also choose how they were going to learn it. That was the research. So they decided if they were going to do book research, do it on the internet, they were going to work with a partner, if they were going to do an interview. They got to choose the product that they which we'll talk about in next, the product that they got to use to demonstrate what they learned. And what this looked like was utter chaos. You walked into my classroom and you had 30 kids working on 30 different things. And it was beautiful. It was the most rewarding year of teaching I ever had. It was terrifying, but it was the most rewarding because kids were making choices. Kids were so motivated. Kids they would get done with the 6 units. And then they would work on independent projects that didn't have a grade, and they worked really hard on them because it was something they were interested in. I had kids learn about roller coasters and the physics of pitching and, birds and volcanoes and different things like that. And so if you give kids choice, they will be interested. They will be motivated. You can give them technology choices. The one thing that I know that's really clear is that my students know more about technology than I do, even the little ones. And so rather than me say, everyone is going to do this, I could say, you have to do this, choose the technology you want to use to do that. And so I get introduced to technology all the time because kids will use GarageBand to do something, or they'll use, Wii Video, which I had not seen before. And so giving them choices in technology is also important because they may be really good at some form of technology, and then they can use that during the process. The last thing when it comes to choice is the product. So when we look at product, this is where they end up finishing. And we usually set the finish line for them. You can see in this picture, there's the finish line that they have to cross. But what if we let them set the finish line? What if they extend the finish line and they extend it even further because they're able to, and they're curious and they want to investigate even more. So they're going to be able to take this product further than the teacher even intended because they're interested in it. And so choice boards are an excellent way to allow kids to say, okay, here's some choices for things. I'm going to narrow it down. If you give them too many choices, sometimes they become overwhelmed. So giving them a few choices can be a really good thing. Sometimes though, once you've trained students, the sky's the limit. Give them a lot of choices. And so Here's an example of two different choice boards. So one is a tic-tac-toe choice board where kids had to do like either up and down and across, a diagonal, whatever, and they have to do 3 of these. And of course, in the middle is the student choice. So students have to do 3 of these things to show me what they learned. What you see on the other side is the list of product choices. And these were 10 choices I gave students when I was doing that the science setup I was talking about. And students got to choose from any of these. And if a kid came up to me and said, Mr. Stanley, I don't like any of these. And I'd say, well, tell me what you'd like to do. And if they had a reasonable request, I would have let them do it. By the way, when it says test there at the bottom, it didn't mean them taking a test. It meant them creating the test, including the questions and the answer key and all of that stuff. So I gave kids choices when it came to the product. So I want to demonstrate visually what this looks like when we give kids choice and we don't give kids choice. So right before Thanksgiving break, I went into, it was the day after kids got out and I was still working, and I was walking through one of our elementary schools, and I was in the kindergarten wing, and I walked past these turkeys that you see here. Save the turkeys, blah, blah. And I looked at these turkeys, and what do you notice about these turkeys? And what you notice about them is they all look the same. Sure, maybe the color goes in a different order, but it's always the same 5 colors. The eyes are always in the same place. The nose is always in the same place. They're making widgets in a factory. These kids are not using creativity. They are following directions that they've been told how to make this turkey. And then I turned around, and another kindergarten teacher had done this instead. She asked them to disguise the turkey, to protect it from Thanksgiving dinner. And so you see one made the turkey a baseball player. Another one hid them in a thing of popcorn. One made them a ninja. Another one hid them in a thing of fries. How creative. And there was a wall full of these. When I looked at this one right here, there were 30 of them, all the same, looked exactly the same. There were 30 of them, and not a single one was the same. They were creative. They were able to choose how they wanted to be creative. And so when we give kids a choice, not only does it motivate them, it allows them to be more creative. They get to use their strengths. They get to understand those things. I might also use choice boards like for this menu board, where I ask kids to do either an appetizer, a side dish, a main dish, and a dessert. And you notice that this used Bloom's taxonomy. So when you start in the appetizers, you got remembering and understanding, which are the lower levels. Then you start moving on up to the analyzing and the creating and evaluating, which are the higher levels. And then, of course, I have them do a reflection at the end. It's really important to have students reflect. You may have that gifted kid that finishes their work early. We all have those kids. What if you gave them a choice board like this? And these are enrichment activities that allow them to push it further. If you finish early, dig a little bit deeper, or extend what you learned, or reflect upon what you learned, or plan a lesson plan, an extension for this, for someone else. So giving kids these choices. And so I would have kids finish early all the time, and I would give them choice, and it wasn't going to be graded, and it wasn't, but because it was something that was interesting to them, or they felt it might be important, or they could see how they could attain it, they were willing to do it. There are some that were not, and that's fine, but I wanted to give that opportunity for students to have a choice. The third one I want to talk about is being intellectually stimulating. So I was listening to Del Siegel. He came to the Ohio Association for Gifted Children conference, and he talked about the difference between academically challenging and intellectually stimulating. We can certainly make classes academically challenging. We can have, a lot of content, a lot of complex content. We could ask difficult questions, but are those things intellectually stimulating? Are we engaging the brain? Are we asking students to think? I mean, if you have kids memorize facts about really difficult things, they are still just memorizing facts. That is not thinking. And so it pained me when I would be working with my high school daughter, and she'd be studying for a test, and she'd have these flashcards. And I remember one of the flashcards said, "How deep is the Erie Canal?" And my initial thought was, who gives a crap how deep the Erie Canal? Why do we ever need to know? Why will we ever in our lives need to know that? A much more interesting question was, why was the Erie Canal only 10 inches deep? And that becomes a much more interesting question when you give them the answer and then ask them a question about it. And so I see a lot of classes that are academically challenging, but I don't see as many as I would like to that are intellectually stimulating. And so how we do this intellectual stimulation is by higher level questioning. So let me give you an example. Here is a math problem. Believe it or not, this is a math problem. So you have these shapes and symbols and colors, you have this number, you have this configuration. How engaged would you be in trying to solve this problem? I can tell you personally, I was at a conference and someone did this, and I was like, that's really interesting. And I'm not a math person. I was like, that's really interesting. And I tried and tried and tried. And I was able to get the correct answer. And then he said, this is what it looks like as a math problem. And as soon as he showed me that, if he had showed us that at the beginning, I would have shut down. I'd been like, I don't know how to do that. But I did know how to do it. And so making things intellectually stimulating is going to get kids to do things that they think they can't do, because you're stimulating their interest. And so there's a huge difference between what we call hard and rigorous. We can certainly make questions hard. Hard questions are questions that are not common knowledge. It would require them to study it or to hear it or something, but it always relies on lower level thinking. Memorization, recall, the lower levels of Bloom's. And so an example of this would be, who was the 22nd Vice President of the United States? Anyone know? Probably not. I don't. And I ask this question all the time because who cares? A rigorous question it doesn't make the question more difficult. It engages the higher levels of thinking. So it takes the question and encourages them to think at a higher level. So we can take this exact same question and ask this way: who do you think has been a successful vice president? And then the students can bring their opinions. They have to create a criteria. They have to explain themselves. And all of a sudden, they're engaging in a lot of higher level thinking, and they're being intellectually stimulated by this question. When they answer the other question, who's the 22nd vice president, they answer it and they're done. It's over. So we want to intellectually stimulate students with rigorous questions, not hard questions. I see a lot of high school classes that have a lot of hard questions, but they are not rigorous. They're not engaging the minds of students. And so we use Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy, sure, it's over 70 years old, but it works. And so we have these higher level thinking and we have this lower level thinking. And let me show you what this might look like in a classroom. If we use Goldilocks and the Three Bears and we ask them to remember something, we're going to ask them, what items did Goldilocks use? And so they would talk about, the different things that Goldilocks used, such as the porridge, the chair, the bed, whatever. So just recall. If we ask them why did they like Baby Bear's chairs best, they would remember from the story, because it was just right. And sure, you could have a conversation about what makes something just right, but it's still the same answer. If you ask them to apply, what would Goldilocks use if she came to your house? So if she came to my house, she wouldn't find porridge, but she might find leftover pizza and, some, tacos in the fridge, whatever. She's going to find different food, but it's still that idea of food that was set up in the story. But watch when we start asking higher level questions. Compare the story to reality. What events could not really happen? So the obvious thing that students always come up with is that bears don't live in a house. But I had this one girl once say to me, Mr. Stanley, I don't understand something. If the porridge all came out at the same time, why is one of the porridge too hot? Why is one of them too cold and one of them just right? That makes no sense. They all had the same amount of cooling time. And I'm like, you're absolutely correct. That doesn't make sense. And so evaluating, judge whether Goldilocks was right for entering the bear's house. This is an ethical dilemma. If you're lost in the woods and you're going to die, are you able to break into someone's house? Because that's breaking the law. And so some people would argue that, yes, you should be able to do that. Other people who are really sticklers for the law may say no. So we would actually put Goldilocks on trial for breaking and entering. This last one, this create, is so simple. So imagine how the story would change if Goldilocks found the door to the bear's house locked. How would that change everything? Would she try to find another way in? Would she have to problem solve? Would she go down the street to the beaver's house? It changes their thinking, and they're thinking about it in a different way rather than just recall. Relevance is the fourth thing I want to talk about. And so this is how authentic is the learning. And this really comes down to the importance. When students can see the relevance of something, they can see why it's important to them, because that's really important to them. They're going to be motivated by that. So for the longest time when I was in school, my relevance was how fridge worthy was something. Did I do well enough that my mom was going to put it on the fridge? And that was my authentic audience, was my mom in the fridge. And if it was on the fridge, I was successful. If it was not, I was not. We need to do better. We need to have authentic products. We have like an art show, filming a YouTube video, submitting work to actual contests, having kids present to adults or to panels, writing argumentative essays to politicians or to newspaper and sending them out. We need to have authenticity. We need to have authentic products. We also need to have authentic learning. And so inquiry learning, which is the umbrella, has project-based learning, problem-based learning, and case-based learning. And I've written books on all three of these because they really tap into the authenticity. They make things authentic. They make kids see the importance of something and what the value in something and how it applies to their own lives. Then there's the hierarchy of the audience. When we have an audience, are they presenting just to their fellow classmates? That's not very authentic. But what if we had them present to others? We just had a project where kids had to create a water park, and they presented it to the mayor of the city and the head of the Parks and Rec department. I mean, how authentic was that? Kids were like really stepping it up to try to get ready for that. The last thing I want to talk about is we do want to appeal to their minds, but we also have to make sure that we don't forget to appeal to their hearts. So the Maslow's hierarchy, and so it's what I call the caring factor. Do we show them that we care? Not just about their teaching, but about them. And so do we show that? And how often do we do that? And so this caring factor is that old Maslow's before you can bloom. You have to appeal to their social emotional needs before you can go to their academic needs. And so there are lots of strategies here, and I'm not going to go through these, but you can see in here, there's choice. There's you being prepared and being professional. There's you giving them responsibility for things. There's admitting to your own mistakes. A lot of teachers are afraid to do that. I would admit to my mistakes all the time so they could see I was human and that it's okay to make mistakes. Another thing you can do to show students that you care about them is ask them how they're doing. Be present. Don't ask them, how was your weekend? Well, that's fine. Okay, great. Because they're going to give the same answer, but really ask them, okay, what'd you do? Tell me about what you did. How did you enjoy that? Whatever, just be kind. I know that seems really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many teachers are unkind. They don't even realize it. Our words carry so much weight with our students that we're not even aware of it. And so we say something sarcastic, just kind of joking around, and we don't realize how much that hurts a student and how much it may affect them. Just saying goodbye. I always stood out in front of my classroom and greeted kids as they came in, and then said bye to them when they left. I see some teachers are sitting at their desk, kids file in, they get to their chairs, whatever. That teacher is not showing that they care. And so when it comes to motivation, my philosophy is that if you build it, they will come. If you make things interesting, if you show them the importance, if you help them to see the relevance or how to attain something, they will be motivated. We don't have to motivate them. We just have to make it apparent how these things work so that they will motivate themselves, that intrinsic motivation that I talked about. And so it's a real simple formula. We personalize the learning for our students. We give them choice. We give them authentic experiences, and we show that we care. And the likelihood that kids are going to be motivated are much higher. Is it a sure-all? Is it a guarantee? It is not. But you stand a much better chance if you do these things. And so I do want to remind you that on the website that I shared before, I have what are called Todd Talks. And Todd Talks are video tutorials that I make for my staff because I can't get around to all the students, because all the buildings, we have 14 buildings. And so I may say, okay, I'm going to talk about how to raise the rigor on homework. And so you can see that there, or I may talk about ways that you can challenge students. And so they're 10 to 20 minute videos. Some are 40, 50 minutes as well. And so those are free, but feel free to look at those. There's over 100 of them. I also have an enrichment page, Enrichment with the Gifted Guy, which are things that students can watch to learn how to take notes or how to play a game or how to make cookies or how to, have read along. So there's all sorts of materials there and resources at your disposal. I really want to thank you for being here with me today. And for those of you who are joining later, for listening. And for those of you who are, and there's going to be a chance for people to ask questions here today. But if you have a question, you watch this later and you have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Twitter or to email me at thegiftedguy@yahoo.com. I love having conversations with people and answering questions. So please don't hesitate to ask those questions. I just got an email a month ago from a professor in Germany who wanted to use project-based learning in his college class, and he was asking me about it. And I loved having that back and forth with him and trying to figure out how to do that. So thanks again for having me. And now I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Todd, thank you so much. I could just tell that you walk the walk. I can hear it in your voice. I can hear it in the stories about kids. that you love to be in the classroom with them and you do this stuff. I can hear it all. That's wonderful. We'll remind everybody, if we're going to spend a little time with some Q&A, if you have a question, go ahead and pop it into the chat. I've got a couple waiting here for you. This is and I know you've had this kid hundreds and hundreds of times in your career. What about that kid, usually a boy, who just hates writing so much? I just like, what do you do with that kid?
So here's my simple answer to that. And it really is simple. If it's not a language arts class, why do they have to write? So my social studies class, I had a kid, Whitlatch. He was repeating. It was the first year I taught. It was his second year through the 7th grade. He hated to write. But if we were having class discussion, Whip would like share all these great things. I knew he knew the stuff. But when you put a pencil in his hand, he was not going to write. So I'm like, why the heck am I having this kid write? And so I took him to the back room and I had a tape recorder. This is how long ago it was. And he hit record and he recorded his answers. 45 minutes later, he comes out. He's filled the tape with 45 minutes worth of answers. And so the question is, if it's not a language arts class, why do they have to necessarily write? Why can't we give them options for their assessments or ways to show us how they learn? If it is a language arts class and you're trying to teach writing, that can be more challenging. But again, let them choose the topics. Let them choose what they're writing about. Don't say, if you say, write about the comparison between this, I don't want to write that. Why would anyone write that? Like, give them some choice in what they're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I think we get so focused on the physical act of writing itself, and it has to be written. And we forget, like, well, that doesn't mean that we can't give all kinds of other choices.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
and yeah.
Mark, it's the 21st century. I mean, we do, everything's on video now. I mean, you go, you have WeVideo, you can have Flipgrid or whatever. You can have kids record their answers so easily and you still learn what they know. And then they don't have to necessarily write. It doesn't mean that they should avoid writing, but some kids just don't like writing.
Yeah, we would rather see the talent shine, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love your description of your classroom and the choice. What do you want to start working on first? What project would you like to start working with first? And you had 30 different kids, maybe doing 30 different things, and then being done with everything, and then they just keep going. Yeah. And without grades, right? They're just going, they just keep learning. I love that description. So I'm imagining myself, let's say, as a first year teacher or first year gifted and talented teacher. And I'm imagining thinking, yeah, I love that. But like, I have no clue, like, how could I possibly put all of that out there? Like, where could a teacher start with that sort of model? Because you got to start somewhere, right?
It's a great question. And the tough answer is that classroom management is the toughest thing, in my opinion, to learn as a teacher. And you don't learn it the first year and you don't learn it the second year, and you're still learning it the 30th year. However, once you get comfortable with the classroom management aspect of it, then here's the wonderful thing about it is you let go of that control. So I think teachers are spending too much time trying to control their classrooms. When if you control the engagement, if you control the learning that's going on, it takes care of itself. And kids are going to not you don't have to worry about, like, I had a teacher, I said, hey, you should try project-based learning. He's like, I'd love to, but if I turn my back on the kids, they light the place on fire. And I'm like, no, they wouldn't. If you had engaging hands-on learning where they were learning in project, they would be engaged in what they were doing. They wouldn't even think about setting something on fire. And so I think a lot of teachers are afraid to let go of that control. Now, I'm going to say, try to get the classroom management thing a little bit of a good idea of how that works before you just give up control. But like, I found once I figured out how to have control, the less I gave it, the more effective it was. And so that's a tough thing though, for teachers to give up that control, because we're always supposed to be in control. But when you walked into that science classroom I described before, Mark, and the chaos that was going on, what you really saw was engagement. You saw kids interested in what they were learning. And I didn't have to go around and catch kids, doing things wrong. I was always amazed. I thought that kid's over there. He's really intent there. He's probably playing a video game. And I'd go around and he'd be looking up something because he was engaged in what he was doing. It doesn't work perfectly for everyone. I'm not a Pollyanna. I understand it doesn't work for everyone necessarily, but I can tell you that it works with the majority of students if you engage them and they'll be motivated.
Let's go to this. One more question for you.
Okay.
First, a comment. I love how your pieces all come back and bite each other's tail. They all relate. They all mesh, right? Just like with your answers to these questions, you go to different parts of your presentation and they all fit together. I love that. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, okay. If you were going to start somewhere, again, we got that first year teacher, and I know you have a book about this too. Mm-hmm. If you're going to start somewhere, like 1 through 5, where do you start?
So it's an excellent question. And what I would say is that unfortunately, what I see a lot of new teachers doing is what they got when they were in school. So what I would encourage you to do if you're a new teacher and you want to try doing this is just what I did is I did a project here or there, or I would do some authentic learning here or there. And then after a few years of becoming comfortable with that, I made it the entire classroom. And that's when that science classroom I talked about didn't happen until year 15. So I didn't do that year 1. And so what I would say is just dabble a little bit, do things that maybe are more traditional at first. But be willing to go outside your comfort zone. We are constantly asking kids to go outside their comfort zone because we know that's where the best learning takes place. But as teachers, we're not always willing to do that. And so we had to be willing to try something and fail and teach our kids. I did a project with the kids one time. It was an utter failure. And I had the kids circle up the chairs and we sat down and I said, look, this project was a failure. I let you down. I wish I would. And so we talked about what I could have done differently. And they took some responsibility too. But by the end of that discussion, they had planned the project for next year's kids, so that it wouldn't have the problems that we had with our project. But you have to be vulnerable. And that's really tough because as a teacher, it's like, I must be in charge. I must have discipline. And yes, you do have to be in charge because you're the adult of record. But at the same time, you don't have to be so disciplined that they're sitting in rows and they're not doing anything other than staring at the front of the classroom. You have to be willing to try some different things.
Yeah. And isn't it so true that if we expect our kids to learn, we have to keep learning in one way or another over the years too. Todd, thank you so much for sharing your information with us, for sharing someone had asked online, what's the web address again, thegiftedguy.com, if you didn't see the response in the chat. But thanks for sharing so many things. I bet your website is full of resources. And
it is just chock full of them sometimes.
Yes. And so thank you once again.